Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Bill Gale. I'm the head of the Retirement Security Project here at the Brookings Institution. Well, not exactly here, but at the Brookings Institution. It's my honor to host this event this morning. Our basic theme is new tools for a better retirement. People spend between a quarter and a third of their life in retirement, and all of the issues that we think about with respect to distribution of income or the status of middle income households, they all apply to retirement issues as well. One general way of thinking about the retirement system in the United States is that it has many advantages, but of course it has many disadvantages as well. The problems it has are largely fixable, though, but they require attention. So we're focused on two solutions today. One is called dashboards and one is called tontines. I will not tell you what those terms mean because you will find out in the next 2 hours. But just to put things into perspective, a useful way to think about what we're trying to do is to go beyond the basic point that people need to save enough to have a good retirement. Yes, people do need to save enough, but they need to do a lot more. They need to manage that saving in a variety of ways. Dashboards and tontines are two ways of managing savings, or helping to make people not only have adequate resources, but utilize them in the optimal manner. So let me add at the outset that the research here was funded by Arnold Ventures. The opinions, though, are those of the authors and the discussants, and not those of any organization. Our first paper on dashboards will be presented by David John. David wears many hats. He is a senior strategic policy advisor at AARP Public Policy Institute. He's the deputy director of the RSP, and he is a non-resident senior fellow here at the Brookings Institution. The paper is also co-authored by Grace Enda, who works here, Mark Every, and me. I'll introduce Mark later. After David's 20-minute talk, there'll be two discussants presenting for 10 minutes each. The first discussant will be Alicia Munnell. She is the Peter F. Tucker Professor of Management Sciences at Boston College's Carroll School of Management. That's quite a mouthful. And she is also the head of the Center for Retirement Research at Boston College. More than that, though, more than the official titles convey, Alicia has been a mainstay of the retirement saving world for 4 decades. I and many others have learned an enormous amount from her and her research and her writing. The second discussant will be Greg McLemont. He is currently associated with IFM Investors in the United Kingdom. He has worked extensively in the pension industry, and he was a member of Parliament from 2010 to 2015. He will offer us a perspective from the United Kingdom, which, as you'll see, has had some ups and downs with respect to dashboards. In any case, we are delighted to have both of you discussing our paper, and we look forward to your comments. With that, David, let me turn it over to you.
Terrific. Thank you, Bill. Let's put on the first slide here, which is the title slide. There we are. And again, this is a co-authored paper. Bill, Mark, and I would not have been able to do anything as well without Grace's assistance in this and the research and the writing that she did. So a special thank you to Grace. Bill, Mark, and I do this on a fairly regular basis. Here, let's move to the next slide. So what is a dashboard? Bill very carefully did not define it. So here we are. It's a tool. It is not a magic bullet. It is not the solution to everything, but it's a management tool found in several countries with defined contribution plans. It's a way to find lost retirement accounts, and that's true both for defined benefit and defined contribution accounts. It's potentially a way to combine small accounts into your current employer's plan. We'll get into this a little bit later, but this is a rather crucial element here. Frankly, it's one that I discovered myself when I joined AARP and tried to combine some of my past retirement accounts into theirs. It's a tool to track both Social Security or benefits and your retirement plans. Now, certain private sector dashboards or websites will allow you to look at an estimate of your Social Security benefits with their retirement plan. But we're talking about here is the overall for all of your retirement plan. It's an educational tool, a source of unbiased information, and potentially a way to reduce leakage, the premature distribution of retirement money that all too often, especially with younger people, means that when they move to a new job, they have to start over again with their savings. Let's move to the next slide, please. It's not a sales tool, and this is an absolutely crucial element here. Commercial products would not be allowed. However, it would, with the information that an individual can gain from the dashboard, it would help savers to be more informed customers. So while this is not a direct sales benefit to the private sector, it is something that should make their lives a little bit easier. Next slide, please. It also is not a magic bullet, as I said. It is not going to change the number of Americans who have a retirement plan. It's not going to change the structure of tax policy. It's not going to help people to convert their retirement savings into retirement income. Mark Avery will talk about that in the next hour. And it's not going to simplify the US retirement income system into something that makes much more sense than the ad hoc system that we've got today. So this is a tool. It is not a total solution. Let's move to the next slide. As you can see, a variety of countries have already put up dashboards of different types or similar. Some of them don't call them dashboards. In Australia, for instance, they use it as a way to consolidate accounts. In Belgium, Denmark, and Sweden, it provides information and helps people to plan their futures here. People access them in different ways. Most cases, it's a digital ID. In some cases, there is a central database, and in other cases, there is a search function where the individual logs in and the dashboard sends out a search request to all the providers for any accounts that meet the criteria for that particular user. In each case, the dashboard has been structured in a way to meet the needs of the individual country, and we're going to be doing that with the US as we go forward. Let's look at one of these existing dashboards. This particular one is from Sweden. The slides are in Swedish, which is probably about as comprehensible as some of the retirement language used in some of the ones, but this will just give you an idea of what it is. So this is the opening page in Sweden. And the idea is to get you to log on and move forward. Let's move to the next one. The next slide, please. Here we are. This is what's going to come up first. And this is basically a projection of what your basic retirement would be. So the little purple bar on the left is your salary. You've got a slider where you can change your retirement age, and the blue, beige, whatever color that is, turquoise, that shows you what your pension income would be. Let's move to the next one. This page shows you all the different retirement pots that you've got and how much is in each one of them. Let's move to the next one. And here it allows you to make a projection of what your retirement income could be. It gives you a couple of options for how you want to structure your projection, and it also gives you different ideas for how to withdraw your money. And then it will give you the graphic to the right of the page, which shows you what your result is. Let's move to the next slide. In this case, the result after you've done your projection, this tells you what you've got from your private pension, what you've got from, in this case, is a workplace pension. The occupational pension is a Swedish version from a workforce, and from the state, and it combines them together. That red bar with the blue shows you what your income structure will be over the years. There, let's move to the next slide. Now, one of the things that's coming here, and one of the important factors that we're going to discuss, is that a dashboard is not something that's going to pop out and have all of its features available immediately. This is a projected feature in the Swedish system that they're working on and will presumably be available fairly soon. This allows you to plan your retirement in even more detail. It gives you your tax calculations, which is an important thing that we often don't consider. It gives you a variety of different ways and scenarios that you can create and sort of figure out for yourself what's going to be happening here as I decide to make retirement plans. Next slide, please. And this is the one that, this is also coming there. This is the one that I think is also an essential feature. This one walks you through transferring your money from one occupational pension or one private pension to another. One of the key features here that you see on the right is that it makes sure that you have the right the right forms, and that the right forms go to the right individual, the right company in this case. That's proven to be a very serious problem in the US. So this is a Swedish system, both as it exists, and the last two slides, let me again say, are what's coming, the preview of coming attractions. Let's move to the next slide. Now, for the US, we wanted to figure out what is the value of a dashboard to the US. The first one is to help people, sorry, we've got cats in the background, find and retrieve inactive accounts and lost benefits. This is a serious problem that we'll discuss. We also want to provide a comprehensive picture of all the retirement benefits, facilitate the consolidation of accounts where appropriate, that's a key factor, to serve as a central source of educational material and other unbiased information, help people plan, and then reduce unnecessary leakage to help people understand the long-term effects of taking their money early and using it for something else. Let's move to the next slide. Lost accounts are a really serious problem here. In 2014, GAO, as you can see, found that just in the previous 9 years, ending in 2014, people had left roughly 16 million accounts with $8.5 billion, and that just counted accounts of $5,000 or less. If you added the larger accounts in, that people had left with their previous employer, you come up to 25 million accounts in just 9 years. Now, we don't have data after that, but in the last 6 years, the use of retirement savings accounts has greatly increased. And I imagine that we would see that this number has escalated rather significantly. So finding those accounts and putting those accounts together with what you have in your current employer could be a very useful function. Next slide, please. We've got a challenge of consolidating accounts, and this is why that last slide in the Swedish system to me means a great deal. This is a hugely complex system in the US, especially if you're moving savings from one employer plan to another. When I left my last employer and decided to consolidate my retirement accounts with my AARP account, I contacted our provider and got an email that stretched on forever in very complex legal terms. I work on this 8 hours a day, more than 8 hours a day, and I had absolutely no idea what to do. I had no idea what forms I needed, and actually ended up getting the advice of a professional advisor who found out that one of my retirement accounts was actually a completely different account than what I was expecting. So you need the right forms, et cetera. And we can put this sort of information in a dashboard so that if you have money with provider A that you've found and you want to combine it with provider B, the proper forms can be brought up. You can fill them out and forward them to the next provider. And we can also add features. What we're starting to see already in some of the fintech areas that would provide a warning. Hey, guess what? You're about to move into a plan that has much higher fees, and this has an effect on your eventual accumulation. Or you're moving into a different risk profile. Are you sure you want to make this move? It's easy in the US to move your money from a retirement plan to an IRA. And there are GAO reports showing that in most cases, this is not an advantageous thing to do for an individual. Fees are higher, various and sundry other problems, et cetera. So by putting this kind of information in a way that it can be easily found could be extremely useful. Let's move to the next slide. So the key attributes that we want in a US dashboard, it has to be very easy to find and access. You don't have to search around forever. We require the participation of all retirement plan providers. So in other words, you will get a comprehensive view of your retirement plans from all of your providers in one place. It'll be available free of charge. You don't have to pay for this service. It will require data standardization and methodology standardization. And both of those are, they sound technical, but they are absolutely essential. They are also very difficult to achieve. Data standardization simply means that when the data comes from provider A, it matches the way the data from provider B is, and the dashboard can display that in one particular way. It also, having a standardized data makes it much easier to move money from one place to another. Methodology standardization is equally key because, for instance, when you do your prediction of income, that means that there is one way that it's done, given some possible changes that I, the user, might choose to make, but I'm going to get the standard answer there. It has to be secure, meaning that it can't be hacked, and it has to present the information in a user-friendly manner. And a user-friendly manner doesn't mean somebody with 20 years of experience in finance and an MBA in finance. It means someone who is just a basic user who is logged onto this and wants to try to figure out what their retirement future is. Next slide, please. Now, as I've tried to mention, this is not an easy process. It sounds much easier than it is, and it would be phased in gradually. The scale and complexity of the US retirement system is a factor of 10 times, somewhere in that thing, what the rest of the world's retirement system is. We have more providers, we have more different products. We, of course, have millions more savers than you'd find in any other country practically. So this is a big project. We anticipate the industries, or at least segments of the industry, are going to be very opposed to the increased government involvement, standardization, and regulation that's necessary to put this together. I would argue that the end result of this will make their lives hugely easy, much easier in the future, but in the short run, there are going to be expenses. Cybersecurity is going to be a continuing challenge. this is a race. This isn't a problem you solve. Every time a solution is out there, we find this in just our normal lives, somebody else is going to find a way to go through that, and you're going to have to strengthen it again. So this is a constant worry here. And last but not least, this isn't going to be really cheap. This isn't going to be something that is going to be cost neutral, especially in the short run. So a source of the funds will be necessary. We believe that this is going to require a substantial involvement by the US government to enforce standards, to probably provide a certain amount of the funding, and perhaps to host the dashboard. The dashboard could, in theory, be hosted as it is in some other countries through a nonprofit entity or something along that line. That's something that we can deal with going forward. And last slide, please. So in conclusion, this isn't going to be easy. It's not going to be fast. We believe it would be very valuable. We believe that the pieces of the dashboard would be rolled out bit by bit. This is not something where there's going to be a snap of your fingers and the entire thing is going to appear. It's going to require determination. This is going to be determination not only by a government entity to make sure that this is done and it's done on time and that it meets the needs, but it's also going to require some determination from providers, from employers, et cetera, to help people to use and understand this. As I say, it would be achieved in stages, but having a comprehensive plan, knowing where we want to go to achieve the good that can result from this, is something that's essential. This is not something that we want to go through and we just simply say, all right, we're going to do this little piece of it and we'll figure out where we want to go after that. That really is a recipe for something that is delayed, it doesn't meet its potential and the like. So in conclusion, we don't want to oversell this. This is not the solution to the US retirement system. It is, however, a way to make it better. And it's a way that we can end up with better educated consumers, consumers who really understand what their retirement outlook is going to be. And I would add, especially in the way of taxes, because in the question of taxes, Medicare premiums and things like this, this is something that most people don't necessarily understand, or if they don't actually have a full picture of this. If we can put something like that in the US dashboard, we can help people approaching retirement to avoid some unnecessary surprises. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alicia Munnell to be our first discussant. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I'm just going to share my screen. I think I did it. So I am delighted to be here today. And I really enjoyed reading the dashboard paper. Since you're such a talented group of researchers, I, of course, didn't find anything incorrect in the document. And you're certainly the team that can put together the fanciest dashboard that one could ever think of. My comments are really addressing whether we need or want such a fancy thing. My critique is twofold. I think the dashboard goes too far. And based on the written document, not on David's presentation, I think that the impact was it's trifle rosy, but I think David said not a magic bullet maybe 3 times. And so just take this as a reaction to the written stuff. So the US does need a pension registry, and I've traipsed around with some of the authors to try to see if one could get set up. We need a national lost and found, since people do lose their accounts and there's no need for that. I also think the idea of seeing all your sources of retirement income at one time is helpful. People are more likely to cash out small amounts than large amounts. So if you see you've got a larger amount, you might keep it in the accounts rather than spending it. I also think it leads to possible better asset allocation if you can see everything you have in one place. And the data are available. I mean, a lot of these data are available. Social Security apparently provides retirees all their accounts when they retire. I actually have claimed my benefits and I don't remember getting it, but that's the story. So let me say, but I think this proposal goes too far in advocating for financial education and advice. And although David didn't emphasize it in his talk, they were excited about a one-button way to consolidate your IRA and 401k balances. So I think that the financial education effort is a bad idea for this. I know I work for a university, so coming out against education is a not necessarily helpful thing to my career, but I don't think people need it. And the dashboard, the author's aspirations for the financial education part of this dashboard just to me seem limitless. It would provide general education material on how much to save, how to invest, when to retire, how much to withdraw, the impact of taxes, the pluses and minuses of various retirement income policies, and on and on and on and on. In addition, the dashboard might refer users to sources of personal planning advice, good luck on selecting which ones, and offer an array of calculators. So that just seems too much to me. Very basically, I don't think that every American needs to become a financial expert. And I don't like the idea of telling people that they need all this junk in order to make sensible decisions about their own retirement. And then on another level, the authors themselves caution against overwhelming users with too much information. And you know, I get to too much. I'm like every man. When I say all that stuff, I just want to back away. So it just has to be very cautious in terms of not overwhelming people. And then the authors also note that the more that you go beyond sort of a narrow registry, the more that you're going to run into private sector resistance, because in some ways you will be competing for the eyes that private sector firms are trying to get to look at their websites, which also have advertisements and other things on it. So my view is show people their accounts, and then I do like one thing very much, which is tell users how much income their pile will generate, and then call it a day. I think this thing is this transferring piles to income streams is probably one of the best aspects of the Secure Act, and I think it should be on your very simple website. So I think our system, actually, as complicated as it is, can really be maximized with a few simple basic rules. Delay claiming Social Security as long as possible, take full advantage of any employer-sponsored plan by contributing enough to get the full match and using a target date fund. Think of your house as a financial asset. I don't think it's rocket science. If people have these three rules, they basically have almost enough to get by on. So that's on sort of going too far. The idea of a one-button account consolidation just seems dangerous to me. I wrote introspection here, but I just laugh at myself because when I got back from Washington around the turn of the century, I began to think about financial things. And I have a son at Goldman Sachs, and he said, oh, as only sons can say to mothers, you must consolidate all your balances. And at that point, I thought, okay, just whatever. So I took everything and gave everything that could move and gave it to him. And of course, I closed my TSP account, which has sort of like zero fees, and put it in his capable hands, which has very large fees. So I'm supposed to be, I like Bill or David, I'm supposed to be knowledgeable, and I did the wrong thing. And so I think if you make it too easy, that people are just going to always shift their money away from 401ks to IRAs, and that is generally a bad idea. Not all 401ks have lower fees, but most large ones do. And you're going to have fewer regulatory protections, more potential conflicts of interest, and in addition to the higher fees. So I think anything that makes it super easy for people to consolidate with a single button is really a bad idea. Then my second point is don't oversell the impact of a dashboard, which I must say, having listened to David's thing, I feel embarrassed to even criticize in this way, because not a magic bullet, not a magic bullet, not a magic bullet. But let me just reinforce that. The lost accounts are really only a small part of the problem. So David alluded to the GAO number of $8.5 billion being left behind. That's left behind. That's not lost. In terms of loss, the numbers in the paper are some from the PBGC, which had a number of 400 million, some from state unclaimed property tax database, which had a number of 38 million. So I think if you're thinking of lost accounts, you're thinking of millions, maybe a few billion, which is a lot. I don't want anyone to have to forego their share of those billions lost. But what does this add up to? This adds up to $22 trillion. So just in terms of dollars, we're talking about relatively small amounts in terms of the lost and found aspect. And then finally, coverage, not leakage, which is what the dashboard, I think, is, if it's going to do anything, is aimed at in terms of behavioral changes, is not the source of the low levels of retirement income that people have. This is a figure from a paper that I did with Andrew Biggs. Yes, Andrew Biggs, and my colleague Angie Chen. And what we did is we were trying to figure out what the difference between $350,000 and roughly $100,000. $350,000 is what, if you took a 22-year-old in the early 80s and put him in a 401k, and he earned or contributed 6%, employer contributed 3%, they earn the market return. How much would they have? And so it's sort of like an Excel spreadsheet. They'd have 350. So why don't they? Well, when you look at the 2016 survey of consumer finances, the average person has roughly 100. And so we looked at coverage issues, fees, and leakages, and most of the problem between, most of the discrepancy can be explained by lack of coverage. Some due to the fact that 401k is still a relatively immature system, but mostly that people are moving from job to job, and a lot of the employers do not have a plan of any sort. So this intermittent coverage is really the big issue. Fees are a slightly big issue, and leakages do erode things further, but it's coverage fixing. Even if you have a marginal effect on leakages, it's not going to have a big effect on the final balances, as David said. So let me conclude. The bottom line is yes to a national registry. I will go out and pick it for you guys and say, we need a registry, we need a registry. But I don't think you need to clutter that up with, quote, educational material and financial tools. I think it's just I don't think it's necessary. And I think it's going to be actually harmful, both to the user and in terms of resistance from the private sector. And I'm totally against anything that makes it easy to press a button and just have everything consolidate. My argument is let's keep it really simple. And then I guess I won't have to worry any longer about overselling the potential impact of the initiative. So thank you very much. I am going to turn this over to Greg.
Thank you, Alicia. Very interesting. A pleasure to be with you this morning, US time, this afternoon, UK time. I thought what I would do is give those assembled a view from the UK, because the UK has been undertaking a dashboard project for several years now, and really try and give a sense of where that's got to, where it has been coming from, and actually within that pick up on a lot of the issues which Alicia has elucidated very well in response to David's paper, because perhaps not surprised that there's a lot of similarities really in terms of the way the debate has played out in the UK between advocates of dashboard, and I say that because there's a debate, as we will come to, around whether there should be one dashboard, as David I think rightly sets out, versus multiple versions of a dashboard provided by commercial entities, which is actually where the debate in the UK has ended up to a significant degree. And within that, debates about the usefulness of financial education, the dangers of transactional dashboards, and where bad decision making might follow from too much information are pertinent. So let me start with the state of play in the UK. So the UK current situation is, in 2016, the government of the day, a Conservative government, announced during its budget that it was going to deliver pensions dashboard/dashboards by 2019, in 3 years from 2016. That's now come and gone with no sign of dashboards being delivered, which probably speaks to David's scale and complexity point, because of course adjusting for the difference in size of country, actually the UK proportionately is as fragmented a pension system as the UK, as the US, a huge number of pension providers and pension plans. So that date's come and gone. The 2016 push came, I think, particularly from that sense that financial education was something to focus on very significantly, and that pensions dashboard would enable individuals to be much better informed and then therefore make better decisions about their pension. In fact, the 2016 push came from the Financial Conduct Authority, who are the regulator of retail pensions in the UK, not of workplace pensions. And as a financial services regulator, their mandate is actually to make competition work in the interests of consumers in the markets which they regulate. So they always tend to focus on financial education, on greater provision of information to individuals as a way to reduce information asymmetries. A view which I personally think in pensions, probably similarly to what Alicia was saying, is pretty optimistic, shall we put it politely, optimistic view of pensions and the individual. So that was the background. We now legislatively, where we stand now is the government's pensions bill has made its way through one part of Parliament, the equivalent of Congress. It's still to go on to the floor of the House of Commons. And actually, it's been quite striking in its passage through the House of Lords, the supervising chamber, where things tend to be debated in a bit more detail and with a bit more technical competence. The government's really had a rough time on 2 points in particular. Firstly, and probably really importantly, to David's point around trying to ensure that this isn't captured by the financial services industry, the government's been very keen, this Conservative government, since 2016, to have dashboards delivered by the industry, not necessarily or in actuality by an independent government or quasi-government entity. they've been really keen to pass it off to the industry. And in Parliament, they've now been pushed back, at least in the House of Lords. It may change in the House of Commons, and they may reinsert these clauses, but pushed in the House of Lords to absolutely commit to a public version of the dashboard, and for the public version of the dashboard to be in place first before any mirroring dashboards, provided by commercial pensions providers and others are made legal. So that's been a push from both opposition politicians, but also actually from members of the governing Conservative Party and the House of Lords peers. And alongside that push for a public dashboard, also an amendment passed in the House of Lords to disallow transactions. To David's really interesting slide about the Swedish system and evolution and the possibility of consolidating your pensions. Again, the House of Lords are very keen that the system gets up and running with a public option version and with transactions not enabled, to take it closer in some to the register, which Alicia talked about. Now, I think in the end, the government will revert to the status quo ante. It will push for multiple dashboards with commercial entities playing a significant part. And that represents a lot of the energy behind the campaigning for dashboards has come from pension providers, the equivalent of the 401k providers in the US, who in the UK see an opportunity to gain market share off the back of their investment in digital capabilities. They think they would have an advantage there. I think it's likely that that's where the dashboard will end up, return to that position. But what you see broadly is that tension between an idea which in some hands, in David's hands, and in the UK in the hands of people like the People's Pension and Nest, the two biggest not-for-profit providers, would be a register that would allow people to bring together pots which have been stranded in the midst of an auto-enrolment system. And the UK coverage, of course, is not so much the issue now with auto-enrolment of the private sector workforce. It's actually contributions, but also the proliferation of these multiple pots as people move jobs, but the pot stays behind. So in some hands, the vision has been along the lines David sets out, and a vision which is very cognizant of the challenges that Alicia set out. So a public option, make it about a way to improve the plumbing of the system, try and bring down the overall system costs by making consolidation easier, increase individuals' awareness and understanding of their pensions, and perhaps then their engagement defined as making a decision, but being very cautious about that. And then on the other side of the scales, or the other side of the argument, you have a view which is much more comfortable with driving financial education via dashboards on the basis that will enable individuals to make better decisions in aggregate about their pensions. And I guess just to take it forward a little bit in the last couple of minutes, David's slides, really astute because very familiar from a UK perspective. So when you get down to the technical detail, and from what David said, it doesn't seem to be a case in the US, but in the UK, a really big challenge is that the government has sold the pensions dashboard to the public, and it is a seductive idea and on its own terms, a one-stop shop to be able to understand and accrue and view all your pensions information. It's been sold to the public as that being the case, but I think politically, certainly in the UK, that rubs up against the challenge of the gradual onboarding of data. Because I've certainly wrestled in my own mind with, will the public be turned off immediately from pensions dashboards if they find that they actually can't see all their pensions in one place? They've got partial information rather than full coverage. And I think a gradual staging of the data obviously creates that political communications challenge, if you want to call it that. And in the UK, that's particularly the case because lots and lots of pensions in the defined benefit corporate side remain undigitised. And beyond that, in the public sector pension space, again, undigitised, a real enormous challenge to get that data in a shape for it to be transmitted to an individual's dashboard. To David's point about data standardisation and methodology standardisation, and I think in the UK it's a real challenge to the extent the public are aware of pensions dashboards, and they mostly aren't. But to the extent they are, it's been sold as this will be created very quickly. You'll be able to see everything in one place, and there's a real challenge to whether that's the case. My sense is that where the government has moved to now is that they'll look to do a long beta phase rather than a gradual staging live to the public, if that makes sense. So there's increasing understanding that partial coverage on the dashboard is going to create some significant communication and trust challenges with the public. And I think that point is really worth making. So I'll just finish. I'll finish on those points. Very similar, familiar to me from the UK, as David set out, both the potential benefits and the challenges. But I would expect in the US, if it's to be anything like the UK, you will find commercial participants as the debate develops, trying to push the direction of travel in one which is more favourable to their interests. I guess that won't surprise anyone, and certainly underpinned rhetorically at least by the view that financial education can really make the system work better. And my own view is that that's probably at best unproven. And I think in the UK, we're some time away from seeing the dashboard. It's now the second half of 2020. It's not moved on very much from where it was maybe 18 months ago. And it probably speaks to the scale and complexity challenges that David spoke to very eloquently.
All right, thank you, Greg and Alicia, and thank you, David, for those comments. Let me remind people who are viewing, if you have questions, you can send them to events@brookings.edu, or you can use the Twitter hashtag retirement security to send us questions or comments. Let me start just by asking David if he wants to respond to anything that the discussants said.
Yeah, I've got a couple points I'd like to make. First off, I think that these comments from both are incredibly helpful and useful. One of the things we don't want to do is to jinx this by promising too much or by basically confusing the issue. Again, this is a tool. It's not the solution, but it's a step towards. Let me address two things in particular. One is the question of the one button, and the one button is something that we put in the paper. It probably won't be in the final version. As a matter of fact, I can pretty much guarantee that it won't. It came up from a demonstration that Mark and I were part of, gosh, that must be 8 years ago, from a provider in Edinburgh, Scotland, actually, that did have a method of combining accounts with one button in their demonstration. I think on retrospect, it's far more valuable to provide the right forms, help people to fill out those forms, and then make sure those forms go into the right location. Speaking from personal experience, as I say, it is frightfully easy to move retirement money from a plan to an IRA, which very often is not a good idea. So making it easier for people to move money from one retirement plan to another with appropriate guidance here seems to me to be far more valuable than the one button approach. Number two is the question of information. And then this one, I think I'm going to push back a little bit. Ideally, we have an automatic system which allows you basically to set it and forget it. I mean, I know nothing about my auto engine except that I drive it to my mechanic and pay far too much money on a regular basis. And I don't need to know, but the information is out there. And we know, for instance, the US government has a wide variety of very good information that's scattered around in a variety of locations. So providing one central repository for that information would probably have some value. The other thing is that I think there's a value to a company in this. Right now, the companies are spending loads of money providing what is essentially duplicated in the government information. And if they don't have to provide that, if they can focus on other things that they're actually more in their wheelhouse, I think that's valuable too. So I think that having information there presented so that it can be found, which is a key factor here. I agree with Alicia completely on that, has value. And with that, let's go on and see what our other discussions are.
All right, thank you. I want to come back to something that Alicia said, that, you know, the retirement system should be simple. And I have a lot of sympathy for that. As David mentioned, you don't have to know how an internal combustion engine works or an electric engine works to be able to drive a car. And you shouldn't have to be, you know, a financial expert just to get through retirement. So that makes sense. On the other hand, almost all simple rules of thumb in retirement financial planning have issues associated with them. For example, claiming Social Security as late as possible is not a good idea for people with low life expectancy. Using a house as an asset is ideal if reverse mortgage markets worked, you know, functioned efficiently, but they're pretty bad deals in a number of respects right now. And it feels to me that it's more like medicine than driving a car, and that there are good ideas, there are healthy ideas, healthy things you can do, and there are good financial planning techniques or good rules of thumb that you can follow. But everybody is in a unique situation, and the unique aspects of their situation, whether it's medically or financially, seem really important. So question, I guess, for Alicia is how do we deal with that while simultaneously keeping the system as simple as possible? I think you are muted right now.
I definitely agree with you that if you have a terminal illness, you shouldn't wait to claim Social Security benefits.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, of course, everybody is unique, but I think that there's some just general rules, and I don't think it's a good system. I think the fact that we don't have universal coverage is terrible, and I don't think everybody ends up with what they need. But I don't think financial planning is what they need. I think we need to take steps to try to make this system better. And even going back to David's point that we should make rollovers easier. Oh my God, I agree. We have the craziest system. The new company doesn't even have to accept rollovers from the old one. There's no standardization in forms. There's no time constraint. There's nothing. We should definitely fix that. My question to you is the place to fix that on the dashboard? Or do we just want a simple repository where people can see their piles and, I think very importantly, how much income those piles will generate?
Great. David, maybe you can, and Greg, maybe you weigh on this. The notion that the US government can do this raises a lot of eyebrows. There are, you know, more than a dozen agencies that deal with financial planning. The most obvious, if you were abstracting from the details, the most obvious place to do this would be the Consumer Financial Protection Board, but they're prohibited from dealing with retirement issues. DOL, Treasury, Social Security, everyone, there's this great amalgam. How do we cut through all that and make something like this happen?
Greg, do you want to start with that or?
Oh, you're muted.
No, go ahead, David.
All right. Well, first off, unfortunately, the regulatory system for retirement in the US mirrors the overall structure in that it's been done on an ad hoc basis. That, well, let's create this. This sounds like a good idea, regardless of how it fits with everything else, et cetera. It makes perfect sense to start to centralize the regulation of the retirement system in one location, whether that's CFPB, whether it's Department of Labor, Department of Treasury, or the host of other potential contenders for the title. This needs to be done regardless, as does the simplification of the system. I would regard the dashboard as a step towards that. Over to you, Greg.
Yes, thanks, David. If Bill doesn't mind, I'll probably make a different point, which I think strikes me from the conversation. I guess in the UK, my perspective on the dashboard has always been, I guess, influenced by a concern that it is a way in which the side of the argument which is very keen on talking about financial education incessantly, has a mechanism for doing so, potentially at the expense of the structural reforms to the system that I would argue take precedence. And I guess that's always coloured my view of the issues. So, while no one can object to a straightforward register, I don't think to object to straightforward register seems sensible. Certainly in the UK, where the debate has gone with the greater emphasis on financial education and allowing individuals to make choices, it's always worried me that might come at the expense of structural reforms. So probably worth making that point because it probably underpins my view of these issues.
Great. Let me just ask one more question then about the experience in other countries. David, you showed us one dashboard. Do we know, has providing these various services help people? Are the dashboards, do people use the dashboards? What do we know from other countries that might give us hints about how effective the dashboard might be?
Well, Greg, you've actually written on this, haven't you?
Yeah, happy to quickly. I think the evidence is pretty limited, I would say, of impact, but that's maybe determined by looking for the wrong thing. I think if one's looking for increased awareness, then when you look at the Dutch, the Danes, the Swedes, you probably see that in a modest basis. But beyond that, in terms of actually changing what people do, I think it's probably harder to see evidence. And it is worth emphasising, and I know from speaking to David, he knows this very well, of course. The systems are very different. If you take those three systems, they are much more consolidated. The difference between those three systems and the UK and the US and the other side is enormous. They've got a lot more consolidation and scale at the fund level, at the plan level, which of course makes the gathering of the information more straightforward. So I'd sum up by saying that I don't think I've heard anyone say that it wasn't helpful to have a register, but equally you haven't heard much that it's transformed the pension system in any significant way. That might be a function of time, that they've not been going very long. But yeah, probably modest impacts.
We do have participation figures from some countries, Sweden in particular, which shows a very substantial use of the dashboard. Now, this comes after Sweden has included a retirement savings module in its Social Security type system also, which I think has gotten people used to this. I see this as a tool that is likely to be increasingly useful as we go forward with a defined contribution savings system. So I agree with everything Greg has said, and much of what Alicia has said, but I think this is something that as we go forward, this will prove to be even more useful than it immediately appears.
All right.
Alicia, you want the last word?
Alicia, did you want to add anything?
Yes, I think we should have the Swedes design our registry.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. Always good to end on a constructive note. So thank you, discussants. Thank you, David.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos from Brookings.